They said the mountains kept their secrets, but when a battle-scarred veteran followed a wild Mustang into the heart of a blizzard, he uncovered something no one was ever meant to see. A hidden Cold War bunker, sealed for decades, was waiting for him. But what lay inside was more than just steel and silence. It was a truth so explosive it could shatter empires, rewrite the past, and put a target on his back. The storm had swallowed the mountains whole. Across the Blue Mountains of Oregon, the first blizzard of the season descended with a fury that seemed less like weather and more like judgment. Wind screamed through the ridgelines in 1,000 jagged voices, clawing at the timber as if to rip the forest from the earth. Snow drove sideways in punishing sheets, striking the pines with a stinging percussion. The high peaks and valleys vanished into a swirling void, as though the world itself had been erased. Here and there, the sharp crack of a branch breaking under the weight of ice carried like the snap of bone. The mountain, so vast and eternal on any other day, seemed fragile now, suffocating beneath the white, strangled into silence. It was the kind of storm that made a man feel very small, a reminder that nature had always been the first and most merciless predator. The horizon no longer existed. Not sky, not ground, only an endless churn of white. To step outside was to be devoured. Nestled within this chaos stood a cabin, small, weather-worn, stubbornly clinging to the mountainside like a splinter in the storm's flesh. Its walls of rough-hewn pine groaned under the onslaught. Each gust forced nails to protest and timbers to shift. The single window rattled violently in its frame, glass vibrating until it hummed like a trapped insect. Snow pressed against the eaves, creeping into cracks, trying to seep through every vulnerable seam. Inside, the air was only marginally warmer. A weak fire sputtered in the stone hearth, its flames little more than dying embers, painting faint orange patterns on the log walls. Shadows filled the corners like stagnant water, heavy and unmoving. The cabin smelled of cold ash, damp wood, and neglect. It did not feel like shelter. It felt like a tomb, still waiting for its occupant to lie down and accept the quiet. At the scarred wooden table in the center of the room sat Ethan Ward, 41 years old, though he carried every year like a stone on his back. Once he had been built like iron, a ranger, sharp, honed, unstoppable. Now his body bore the erosion of 7 lost winters, tall and lean still, but the muscles that had carried him through deserts and firefights had thinned, stripped away by neglect and solitude. His hair, once a soldier's cropped brown, was streaked with grey at the temples. His beard had grown thick and unruly, dark but peppered with silver. Beneath it, his jaw was tight, locked in the permanent set of a man who had forgotten how to relax. His eyes were a blue-grey storm of their own, dulled by exhaustion, but behind them lingered the ghost of something that had once been kindness. He wore a faded red and black flannel shirt, sleeves frayed at the cuffs, over a thermal so threadbare it might as well have been paper. His boots were scuffed, laces mismatched, the leather cracked by cold and years of silence. The reflection in the cabin's window confirmed what he already knew. He looked like the ghost of a man who used to exist. His own image, blurred by frost, half erased by darkness outside, was more spectre than soldier. On the table before him lay a single sheet of paper, white, crisp, unyielding, its official black print cutting through the gloom like a knife. Notice of default, immediate eviction. The words were sterile, bureaucratic, cold, but to Ethan they read like a sentence. He had read them half a dozen times, and still they felt foreign, like a language from a world he no longer belonged to. Yet the meaning was clear enough. The cabin, his last outpost, his final pathetic fortress, was no longer his. It wasn't just a structure he was losing. It was the last thin thread tethering him to the civilized world. A roof above his head, 4 walls to keep out the cold, and the illusion, barely, that he still had a place on the map. With this notice, even that illusion was gone. He leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking beneath his weight, and let the paper sag in his hand. His throat worked once, an aborted laugh without sound, the kind that carried more bitterness than humor. It always came back to Marcus. The thought cut through him before he could resist. Marcus Hale, his brother, not by blood, but by bond, his ranger partner. The man who had pulled him out of firefights, who had steadied his aim when his hands shook, who had been the last real light in a life that had gone dark, and the man Ethan had failed to protect. Afghanistan, 2011. A valley that still burned in his nightmares, a mission that turned to chaos in minutes, gunfire from every ridge, the air torn with smoke and screams. Ethan had been the shield, the one meant to hold the line, to drag his brothers back alive. Marcus had gone down in that chaos, blood-soaking desert sand, his voice cut off mid-laugh, mid-life. Ethan had carried his body out, but not his spirit. The guilt had followed him across oceans, into silence, into exile. 7 years since. 7 years of whiskey bottles lined like sentinels, of nights broken by dreams too real to ignore, of mornings where the mirror showed him someone he did not recognize. The cabin had become his prison, his punishment, his attempt at penance. And now even the prison was being taken away. The storm raged outside, but it was nothing compared to the storm within. Marcus had believed in him. Marcus had laughed and said, "You worry too much, Ward. We always find a way." But there was no way now, no mission to complete, no team to save, only a broken soldier, an eviction notice, and the white void waiting just beyond the door. The fire popped weakly in the hearth, the sound startling in the silence. Ethan glanced at it, then back to the door. The idea came quietly, the way lethal ideas often did. He could just walk outside, step into the storm, lie down in the snow. Let the cold seep in until it silenced everything. The guilt, the memories, the constant gnawing ache that never left his chest. No grand gesture, no resistance, just surrender. The blizzard would do the rest. His gaze fixed on the door, the simple wooden door, its iron latch shivering with every gust outside. It was more than wood and iron. It was a threshold, the line between suffering and release, between the hollow continuation of this existence and an ending that was, in its own way, merciful. The wind screamed against the cabin, howling like wolves in the night, rattling the walls, daring him to step out. Ethan sat in silence, the eviction notice limp in his hand, his body motionless. The decision hung heavy in the air, thick and final, and in that silence the storm roared louder, as though nature itself was calling him forward. He stared at the door, the rickety, weather-stained door that separated life from death. The fire died lower, shadows closing in, until only the sound of the storm remained. And Ethan Ward, soldier once, ghost now, sat on the edge of surrender. The storm did not stop at the ridges. It rolled down from the high slopes of the Blue Mountains, tumbling like an avalanche of wind and snow until it struck the valley below. There, at the foot of the mountains, lay the small town of Ironwood, a town of no more than 2,000 souls on the census rolls, though on nights like this, it felt like even fewer. Ironwood was a place of lumber mills and shuttered storefronts, of quiet streets where dogs barked at nothing and men gathered at the diner for coffee, thick as tar. Tonight those streets were empty, erased beneath a tide of snow. The storm pressed against every clapboard house and weather-beaten porch, hammering shingles, rattling shutters, seizing every unlatched door in its grip. On the very edge of town, where the paved road gave way to dirt and the dirt to drifting snow, an old wooden house clung stubbornly to the earth. Its timbers sagged with the weight of decades, paint had peeled to grey, leaving bare wood exposed to the storm. Yet a glow burned in one window, a small flame of life. Inside that house, someone still kept watch. Where Ethan's cabin on the mountainside had become a tomb of silence, this house in Ironwood still bore the traces of community. The faint murmur of a radio, the warm smell of kerosene, the old clock on the wall ticking away against the storm. Still, even here, the blizzard pressed close, muffling the world in its white grip, as though reminding the town that no refuge was safe forever. The man inside was named Jonas McKay. 75 years had carved him into something like the land itself, lean, weathered, stubborn. He had fought in Korea as a boy, not yet old enough to drink, and in Vietnam as a man already older than most of his squad. 2 wars, too many battles, too many names that never came home. The army had taken his youth, left him scars, and finally given him back to a country that had long since moved on. Jonas had not moved on. He had stayed here in Ironwood, half because the land was in his blood, half because he had nowhere else to go. Over time, he became one of those old men people recognized without ever really knowing, the kind who carried the weight of secrets in his eyes. And tonight, those secrets pressed down heavier than the snow on his roof. He sat at a worn pine desk, a kerosene lamp flickering at his elbow. In his hands lay a notebook, its leather cover cracked and soft with age. The pages were lined with handwriting he could recognize even in the dark. Marcus Hale's handwriting, bold strokes, a man's hand, written without hesitation. Marcus had been gone for years now, but his voice still lived in the lines of this journal. Jonas turned to the last page, where Marcus's scrawl had grown sharper, more urgent. If Ethan loses everything, release Raven. He'll know where to take him. Trust the horse, trust the bond. It will lead him to where he needs to be. Jonas sat in silence, staring at the words until his old eyes blurred. He had read them many times before, but tonight they felt heavier. Outside, the storm howled like a living thing, and with it had come news, rumors carried through the thin web of town gossip. Ethan Ward, Marcus's old ranger partner, was losing the cabin. The bank had claimed it. The last roof over his head was gone. The time Marcus had written about had come. Jonas closed the notebook and sat back with a long, tired sigh. The weight of years pressed against his chest, the ache of old bones and older memories. He thought of Marcus, sharp grin, quick wit, a man who always seemed to know more than he let on. Marcus had believed in Ethan long after Ethan stopped believing in himself. And Marcus, in his own way, had believed in Jonas too, believed he would carry out this final instruction when the time came. "Stubborn kid," Jonas muttered into the empty room, his voice raspy with age. "You always trusted him more than he trusted himself. And you trusted me to see this through. Well, I'll trust you just this once more." He rose slowly, joints stiff, and reached for his heavy coat. The thick wool smelled faintly of smoke and horse. He pulled it around his narrow shoulders, buttoned it with hands that shook only slightly, and settled a knit cap over his thinning grey hair. Then he lit a lantern, its flame steady inside the glass chimney, and stepped toward the back door. The wind slammed against him as he opened it, nearly stealing the breath from his lungs. Snow swirled into the room, clinging to the wooden floor. Jonas set his jaw, gripped the lantern firmly, and trudged through the drifts toward the outbuilding behind the house. The stable. Inside the stable, the storm's howl dulled to a muffled roar. The lantern cast long shadows across wooden stalls, hay strewn thin on the ground, tack hanging like relics on the wall. And in the largest stall stood Raven. The Mustang was a dark monolith against the straw, his coat black as midnight, his mane tangled but gleaming like wet steel beneath the light. He was taller than most horses, muscles corded beneath his hide, eyes bright with untamed fire. On his left shoulder ran the scar, a long pale line across dark flesh, the mark of an old wound. Marcus had told Jonas the story once, how he had found Raven tangled in a poacher's snare years ago, how he had cut him free and stood his ground until the terrified animal realized he was safe. That day, a bond had been struck. Not ownership, not taming. Something stranger, fiercer. Trust between two survivors. Raven stamped once, his hooves ringing against the wood, as if he sensed the storm's weight and the man's intent. His ears flicked forward, and his breath steamed in the cold. Jonas stepped closer, his hand reaching out to stroke the Mustang's neck. The horse did not flinch. The old man's fingers brushed the scar, rough against smooth hide. His throat tightened. "It's time, old friend," Jonas whispered, his voice breaking the silence like a prayer. "You know where to go. Find him. Lead him to the truth." For a moment, the stable was utterly still, just the faint creak of wood, the storm's distant howl. Then Raven threw his head back and let out a piercing whinny, a sound so sharp it rattled the rafters. His breath clouded the air like smoke. He pawed the ground, impatient, ready. Jonas nodded once. "Go on then. Marcus was counting on you, now I am too." He slid back the heavy bolt on the stable door. The wind surged in, cold and merciless, carrying with it a torrent of snow. For an instant, Raven stood silhouetted against the white night, black against white, muscle against storm. Then he surged forward. The door banged wide, snow exploding around them. Raven plunged into the storm, his mane whipping, hooves pounding the frozen earth with a thunderous rhythm. He became motion incarnate, a dark phantom cutting through the snow. Within seconds, he was half lost in the storm, his form a blur of shadow and fire. Within a minute, he was gone, swallowed by the blizzard, leaving only the echo of his hoofbeats in the night. Jonas stood in the doorway, lantern shaking in his hand, eyes fixed on the white void where the horse had disappeared. His breath came in slow, visible plumes. Age weighed heavy on his shoulders, but something else pressed heavier still. Hope. Fragile, dangerous hope. "Marcus," he murmured into the night, his words stolen by the wind. "For your sake, I hope you were right about him." Then he closed the stable door, turned back toward his house, and left the storm to carry Raven into the mountains. The silence inside the cabin had grown unbearable. Ethan Ward sat motionless at the table, the eviction notice still in his hand, though the words had blurred into nothing long ago. He had not read them again. There was no need. They were burned into his skull. A final verdict passed on a man who had already been living in exile. The fire had collapsed to embers, glowing faintly like the last stubborn coals of a dying life. His body ached from stillness, from cold, from the weight of too many years spent waiting for something that never came. At last, he pushed himself up, joints stiff, the chair scraping harshly across the wooden floor. The decision had been made. He would open the door, step into the storm, let it take him. The thought came with a strange calm. No more battles with sleep, no more whiskey to drown the voices, no more waking up in a cabin that felt like a coffin. He imagined the snow covering him, slowly burying him until there was no trace left. The same way the world had already erased Marcus. Ethan crossed the room, each step heavy. His hand hovered over the iron latch, and then the world split open. A sound unlike anything he had heard in years ripped through the storm, through the cabin, through his chest. A cry so loud it drowned the shriek of the wind, so sharp it vibrated the very walls. It was a horse's cry, wild, defiant, unbroken, a long, piercing whinny that seemed to shake the timbers of the cabin. Ethan froze, hand on the door, his breath caught mid-chest. His heart slammed once, then again, faster, harder. For the first time in years, something inside him stirred. His blood, sluggish and heavy with grief, surged hot and alive. The sound came again, closer, cutting through the storm like a blade. It wasn't possible. No horse would be out there, not in this, not here, miles from the nearest ranch, in the heart of a blizzard that had erased every road, every path. But the cry had been real. Ethan's hand closed on the latch. He yanked it open. The storm burst inward. Wind and snow slammed into him, clawing at his flannel, searing his face raw. He staggered back half a step, but forced himself to lean into it, eyes narrowing against the blinding white. At first, there was nothing but the void. Endless sheets of snow driving sideways, erasing everything. Then, movement. A shadow emerged. Step by step, the shape broke free of the storm's grip. A horse, black against the blinding white, towering and magnificent. Ethan's breath hitched. The animal stood just beyond the doorway, snow clinging to its mane, its flanks dusted white as marble. Steam poured from its nostrils in thick plumes, each exhale a declaration of survival against the storm. Its hooves were buried deep in the drifts, but it stood tall, unyielding, the snow whipping around it as though the storm itself bent to its presence. And then Ethan saw its eyes, amber, bright, burning, not wide with fear, like any beast caught in such a fury, but steady, focused, the gaze of something that had come with intent. The horse did not move, it did not flinch, it simply stared at him. Ethan's grip tightened on the doorframe, his knuckles white. It wasn't just a horse, it was waiting. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. His throat felt tight, constricted by disbelief, by the flood of something that was not quite recognition, but close enough to hurt. And then the horse shook its head. Snow cascaded from its mane, scattering into the wind. For a moment, the movement revealed something hidden beneath the frost, clinging to its neck. A cord. A length of paracord, braided thick and strong, the weave intricate and unmistakable. Ethan's stomach dropped. It was a cobra knot. The breath left his lungs in a single ragged gasp. His eyes locked onto the braid, mind reeling backward, back through the years, back to another place where laughter and sweat and gun oil mingled in the dust. The cobra knot had been their signature, his units. Rangers on deployment with nothing but time between firefights had braided those cords to pass the hours, to leave a mark that was theirs alone. Marcus had been the best at it, weaving the knots tight and perfect, handing them out as tokens. Ethan could still remember the last time he'd seen one, wrapped around Marcus's wrist just before the ambush. No one outside their unit knew that knot. No one. Ethan stumbled back a step, his hand clutching the edge of the door like it might keep him upright. His breath came hard and fast, fogging in the air. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, though the words barely made it past his lips. "That's not. It can't be." But it was there, real, solid. The paracord dark against black hide. His rational mind fought back instantly, desperate for control. He was seeing things, that was all. The storm, the silence, the years of grief had finally cracked him. A hallucination, nothing more. The kind of trick a starving, broken brain could play on itself. But everything else, his instincts, his gut, the part of him honed in firefights and ambushes, screamed the opposite. This was no mirage. This was real. His mind betrayed him with memory. Marcus's voice, clear as if he were standing beside him. "Don't overthink it, Ward. You'll know when the time comes." The last time he had seen that knot, Marcus had been alive, laughing. Now it was here, around the neck of a wild Mustang in the middle of a blizzard. The horse stamped once, its breath flaring. Its amber eyes never left him. Not pleading, not begging, commanding. Ethan swallowed hard, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. "No," he whispered to himself, shaking his head violently, as though denial could erase what stood in front of him. "No, this isn't happening. This isn't real." But Raven did not disappear. The storm howled around them, snow biting into Ethan's face, but all he could see was that horse, black, scarred, unbroken, staring at him with the eyes of something older than fear. The air between them thickened, charged with something Ethan couldn't name. It was more than recognition, more than coincidence. It was as if the storm itself had delivered this creature to his door, carrying with it the weight of the past, the echo of Marcus's voice, the ghost of a bond that refused to die. The horse shifted, its muscles rippling beneath its coat, and for an instant Ethan thought it would vanish back into the white. Instead, it let out another whinny. The sound tore through him. It was not just noise. It was a summons. Ethan staggered forward half a step, his hand trembling on the frame of the door. He wanted to slam it shut, to barricade himself against the impossible, but another part of him, older, deeper, the part that had once followed Marcus into fire, wanted to step out, to answer. The horse cried again, louder, sharper, echoing through the canyon of his chest, like the call of a bugle on a battlefield. Ethan's heart pounded. His breath came ragged. For years he had lived with silence so heavy it smothered him. Now sound had come tearing through that silence, calling him back. His eyes burned with something he had not felt in so long he barely recognized it. Not despair, not grief. Life. The storm roared, the horse waited, and Ethan Ward stood trembling in the doorway, caught between surrender and something he had thought forever lost. For a long moment, Ethan did nothing. He stood in the doorway, snow clawing past him into the cabin, the storm howling like it meant to tear the walls apart. The horse did not move. It simply waited, amber eyes steady, steam rolling from its nostrils in thick, hot bursts. Ethan's mind warred with itself. This was madness, hallucination, the final unraveling of a soldier long past usefulness. And yet his body shifted back instinctively. He couldn't explain the step, but it was an invitation. Raven stepped forward. The Mustang crossed the threshold like a shadow, snow falling from his mane and flanks, hooves striking the wooden floor with a hollow, heavy sound. He filled the cabin in a way no living thing had in years, too large for the room, too alive for the silence. His sides quivered faintly with cold, his breath fogging the air until it swirled with the smoke from the hearth. Ethan swallowed hard. Automatically, without thinking, he crossed to the corner where he had once stored supplies for a life he no longer lived. A bundle of old straw lay there, forgotten but dry. He dragged it across the floor, scattering it in the center of the cabin. The motion was instinct, muscle memory, the way he had once cared for pack animals in the desert, for the horses the rangers had commandeered in mountains overseas. His hands worked without command, as though another version of himself had taken control. Raven lowered his head, nostrils flaring, and poured the straw once before settling heavily onto it. The cabin creaked under the weight, the fire hissed in the hearth, and for the first time in 7 years, Ethan was not alone. The silence, so long a suffocating shroud, was broken. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the animal, trying to make sense of it, trying to believe what every instinct told him was impossible. And then the fire shifted, throwing a stronger glow across Raven's flank. That was when Ethan saw the scar. It carved across the Mustang's left shoulder, pale against the dark hide, a long, ugly memory of steel biting into flesh. The sight stopped Ethan cold. His breath caught in his throat as the cabin around him seemed to fall away, replaced by a memory so sharp it was like a blade. Marcus's voice. They had been sitting in a sandbag bunker in Afghanistan, passing time in the brief lull between patrols. Marcus, leaning back with that cocky grin of his, had told him about a Mustang he'd once seen while on leave in the States. Thing was caught in a poacher's snare, Marcus had said, eyes bright even under the desert sun. Iron teeth had chewed half through its shoulder. But when I got to it, damn if it didn't look me right in the eye like it was daring me. I cut it loose, watched it bolt, and I knew it would never forget. You don't forget the hand that frees you. Ethan's knees weakened, his hand lifted without thought, trembling as it reached toward the scar. Fingers brushed the ridged skin, warm under the coarse hair. He closed his eyes. It was too precise, too exact. Not a coincidence. Marcus had told him this story. Marcus had saved this animal. And now the animal was here. He pulled his hand back sharply, staring at Raven as though the horse might vanish if he blinked. But Raven did not move, only flicked his ears and returned the gaze. Ethan's mind flooded with more memories. Marcus's habits, his way of planning every mission twice, his insistence on backup routes, fail-safes, contingencies, even when everyone else thought it unnecessary. He had been the kind of man who saw further down the road than anyone else. And now the pieces fit together. The paracord knotted in a cobra weave, the scar, the horse that had appeared out of the storm. They weren't accidents. They were markers. A code Marcus had left behind. Raven wasn't just here, he had been sent. Ethan's throat tightened, words formed inside him, torn from a weight of belief he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Marcus, even in death, you're still leading me. He sat heavily in the chair, shaking his head, almost laughing at the insanity of it. But there was no room left for doubt. He had thought it hallucination. Now, against all his skepticism, he believed. The eviction notice still lay on the table. The paper was white as the storm outside, black letters cutting through it like barbed wire. Default, eviction. Words that had killed him in silence long before the storm had arrived. Ethan rose slowly. His hand closed on the paper. He stared at it for a long time, the edges crumpling under his grip. Then, without hesitation, he crossed to the hearth. The fire was weak, a handful of glowing coals. He shoved the paper into them, flames licked upward, catching fast, devouring the ink until the word eviction shriveled and turned to ash. For a moment, the cabin glowed brighter with the blaze, as if even the fire celebrated the destruction of that last sentence against him. It was not salvation, but it was defiance. Ethan turned to the corner where his pack lay buried beneath dust and time. He dragged it out, the zipper stiff but still working. Inside lay relics of a life he had sealed away. A survival knife, its edge still sharp, a battered lighter, a small medkit, a coil of rope. He laid them out on the table one by one, his hand steady for the first time in years. Each item was a memory, each a reminder of the soldier he had once been. He pulled on a heavier coat from the same pile, buckled the straps, fastened the old harness. His reflection in the window still showed a haunted man, but something had changed in his eyes. A glimmer, not of hope, not yet, but of purpose. The cabin loomed around him, but it no longer felt like a sanctuary or a prison. It was simply a shell, a mausoleum of the last 7 years, a place where he had wasted time waiting for death. And now, at last, he understood he could not stay. He looked at Raven. The Mustang had risen again, standing tall despite the storm outside, ears pricked forward, muscles tense. His amber eyes glowed in the firelight, steady and unyielding. Ethan felt the weight of the stare like an order. He crossed the cabin, his boots striking hollowly against the floor. His hand reached the latch once more, but this time it was not with the weariness of surrender. He drew a deep breath, braced himself, and threw the door open. The storm rushed in, fierce and blinding, snow stinging his face. But it no longer felt like an executioner's breath, it felt like a challenge. Raven surged forward, letting out a whinny so sharp it cut through the storm like a trumpet on a battlefield. His hooves crashed against the threshold, then onto the snow outside, his black form surging into the blizzard with power and certainty. Ethan stood in the doorway, the wind battering his body, cold slicing to the bone. His chest rose and fell rapidly, not with panic, but with something else, something long buried. He tightened the straps of his coat, adjusted the pack on his shoulders, and stepped after Raven. For the first time in years, he was not walking into the storm to die. He was walking into it to live. The cabin vanished quickly behind him. At first it lingered as a faint glow in the storm, a dim orange pulse in the white void. Then the snow swallowed it whole. The flicker of firelight disappeared, and with it the last remnant of the life he had known these past 7 years. Ethan stopped once, halfway up the slope, and looked back. There was nothing now. No light, no roofline, no trace of the prison he had called shelter. Just storm and night and silence. His chest tightened. For all its suffocating walls, for all the years of despair lived inside it, the cabin had been his last tie to the world. Now it was gone. He let out a long breath, one that steamed white and vanished into the gale. The ache in his chest shifted. Not entirely grief, not entirely relief, something in between. The chain was broken. He felt both lighter and emptier, as if he had set down the last piece of himself he had carried for too long. When he turned back, Raven was waiting. The Mustang stood a few yards ahead, a half shadow in the blizzard, snow clinging to his mane, eyes glowing like twin embers. When Ethan moved, the horse moved. When Ethan hesitated, Raven stamped his hoof, urging him forward. Then the black stallion turned and began walking into the storm. Ethan followed. The horse did not wander blindly. His steps were firm, deliberate, pressing through drifts that would have stopped another beast cold. He avoided the open stretches where wind scoured the land flat, steering instead toward narrow game trails cut into the forest, weaving between pines and firs whose trunks rose like black pillars in the white. Ethan realized quickly this was not random. Raven's path was tactical. He recognized the choices, the avoidance of exposed ridges, the preference for shadowed gullies, the way the horse paused at intersections of deer track and creek bed to test the air before choosing the least obvious route. These were not the instincts of a lost animal. These were the movements of a scout. Snow stung Ethan's cheeks, whipped his hair against his forehead, soaked into his flannel. He pulled his coat tighter and pressed on, boots crunching into the snow, lungs burning with each breath. He was aware, with growing clarity, that his own body had begun to remember. At first it was small things, the way his eyes adjusted to track movement in the storm, the way his feet found steady ground even on slick slopes. But soon he found himself reading the terrain as he once had in foreign mountains. His gaze picking out broken branches, shifts in snowdrifts, the subtle lines of the wind. Each breath burned but also sharpened him, filling his chest with fire instead of ash. His pulse quickened, not from panic, but from rhythm, the same pounding beat he had once felt under body armor, rifle in hand, heart braced for combat. 7 years he had let the soldier rot inside him. But with every step in the storm, with every instinct resurfacing, Ethan felt that soldier stir again. He almost laughed, though the sound caught in his throat. I've been dead 7 years, but right now, I'm alive again. The storm did not relent. It clawed at them, hurled snow sideways, pressed down with weight enough to crush the unprepared. Ethan slipped more than once, his legs collapsing into hidden drifts, his hands scraping ice and rock. Once, he fell hard enough to slam his shoulder, the pain jolting through his body. He cursed aloud, struggling to rise, and Raven waited. The Mustang stopped ahead of him, turned his head back, and fixed him with that unyielding amber gaze. For a moment, Ethan could almost believe there was thought behind those eyes. Patience, even encouragement. Then the horse tossed his head and stamped once, as though to say, "Get up, keep moving." So he did. The terrain grew harsher. They crossed a frozen creek, its surface a sheen of glass with black water churning beneath. Ethan's boots slipped, his balance faltering, but Raven moved as steady as if the ice recognized him. Ethan pressed a hand against the horse's flank for balance, feeling the hot strength of muscle beneath the coat. Together they made it across. They pushed through stands of pine where branches hung low with snow, the air thick with the sharp scent of resin. The storm screamed above, but under the canopy it was muffled, replaced by the crunch of hooves and boots in snow, the rasp of Ethan's breath, the occasional crack of a branch giving way. Hours blurred. Time became nothing but distance measured in drifts and trees. His body screamed at him to stop, to rest, to surrender. But something deeper urged him forward. It was more than survival now. This was a pilgrimage, a rite. Each step in the storm stripped away another layer of the man he had been in exile, leaving behind only what could endure. By the time Raven slowed, Ethan felt transformed. Exhausted, frozen, aching, but alive. The Mustang halted before a wall of granite. It rose sheer and massive from the earth, black and grey, ice crusting its face, snow clinging to ledges. It looked like the end of the world. Ethan stumbled to a stop beside the horse, staring upward. The rock stretched into the storm, vanishing into mist, a fortress built by gods. "This is it," Ethan's voice cracked, hoarse from wind and silence. He shook his head, chest heaving. "There's nowhere else. Dead end." Raven did not move. He pawed once at the snow, then stepped forward to a low boulder at the cliff's base. Ethan watched, frowning, as the horse lowered his head and struck the stone with a sharp, deliberate blow of his hoof. A sound followed. Click, faint but distinct, a metallic echo hidden beneath the roar of the storm. Ethan's eyes widened. He stepped closer, heart hammering. The ground trembled faintly underfoot. Snow slid down the cliff in small avalanches as the granite wall itself seemed to stir. A line of light appeared, thin as a hair, running vertically through the stone. It spread, widening, glowing faintly against the storm's darkness. The line stretched upward and outward until a massive shape resolved. A doorway. The cliff groaned, rock grinding against rock, and then, slowly, impossibly, the granite split open. Behind it loomed a steel door, massive and seamless, the kind of structure no one would ever expect to find hidden in the mountains. Ethan staggered back a step, staring, his face lit by the pale glow seeping from the seams. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Raven stood calm before the door, his breath steaming in the cold, eyes fixed on Ethan as if to say, "This is why I brought you here." The storm howled uselessly around them, snow whipping past, but in that moment Ethan felt something shift. The past had not been buried. It had been waiting, and the door was open. The steel door swallowed them whole. Ethan stepped across the threshold, Raven's heavy hooves clanging against metal, the sound reverberating down the narrow corridor. Behind them, the colossal slab of granite and steel slid back into place, sealing shut with a grinding thud that cut off the storm as cleanly as if the world had ended. In an instant, the blizzard was gone. No more wind clawing his skin, no more snow blinding his eyes. Only silence. The air was stale but dry, touched faintly with a tang of machine oil. Pale neon strips hummed to life along the ceiling, casting a thin, sterile glow over walls of riveted steel. The corridor was tight, claustrophobic. The echo of every step magnified until Ethan felt as though he were walking inside the belly of some slumbering beast. Raven's snort carried far down the passage, a reminder that he was not hallucinating this moment, not dreaming. Then his gaze fell on a faded insignia painted near the entrance, almost rubbed away by time but still legible. Cascade Relay Station, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, 1961. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of history pressing down on him. A relic from the Cold War. A station buried in the mountains like a seed of paranoia. But this one hadn't been abandoned to rust and dust. Someone had kept it alive. Marcus. The thought hit him as hard as the storm outside had. The corridor opened suddenly into a vast chamber. Ethan stopped dead. The room was circular, domed like the inside of a buried fortress. It was spare but orderly, every corner of it speaking not of abandonment, but of precision. On the far wall stood a row of military cots, each blanket folded sharp and square, corners tucked with the same crisp geometry he had seen 1,000 times in barracks. Beside them, shelves of supplies, boxes of MREs stacked neatly, water jugs sealed, untouched sacks of rice and beans packed tight. The labels looked almost new, dates current enough to make him blink. He turned his head and saw the weapon racks. Rifles and carbines mounted on steel pegs, their barrels oiled, their stocks free of dust. Someone had cleaned them recently, perhaps often. They gleamed under the neon lights, and then his eyes landed on the machines against the far curve of the chamber. Banks of servers hummed softly in sleep mode. A control console bristled with switches, monitors, and keyboards that looked retrofitted but functional. On one screen, a faint green light pulsed, steady as a heartbeat. Ethan's throat tightened. Marcus hadn't just found an abandoned bunker, he had rebuilt it, transformed it. This was no ruin. It was an outpost, alive and waiting. Behind him, Raven circled slowly on the steel floor, his hooves ringing hollowly in the chamber. He came to rest near one corner, lowering his head as if to drink in the quiet. His amber eyes shone faintly in the pale light, and when they met Ethan's, the soldier felt a strange certainty bloom in his chest. "This is it," the eyes seemed to say. "This is why you came." Ethan moved toward the console, his boots echoing on the metal floor. His hand found a heavy switch set into the wall. He hesitated, then pulled. The bunker woke. A low hum rose from the depths as the geothermal generators churned back to life. Vents shuddered, then hissed, blowing stale air out and fresh circulation in. The neon strips brightened from pale to sharp white. Servers clicked, screens flared. The hum became a steady drone, a vibration he could feel in his bones. One monitor blinked awake, its surface flickering through lines of code before resolving into a crude operating system. A logo appeared. Military issue, old but unmistakable. Ethan lowered himself into the chair before the console, his body heavy with recognition. He had sat in rooms like this before, under different mountains, in different wars, staring into screens that dictated life and death. The glow on his face was both alien and familiar, like an echo of who he had once been. He began scanning directories, the cursor clicking across a menu of folders. Most were designations meaningless to anyone but Marcus. Numbers, acronyms, code words. But one stood out. Legacy. Ethan's stomach clenched. His finger hovered, then clicked. The first file stuttered open, a grainy video time-stamped years earlier. The picture jumped with static, but the shapes were clear enough to freeze Ethan's breath. Men, Americans, soldiers in civilian clothes, faces shadowed by caps, standing in a rocky ravine that Ethan knew instantly was Afghanistan. Opposite them, armed insurgents. Between them, a silver case. Ethan leaned closer, his jaw tightening as he watched the exchange. The case slid from American hands into those of the insurgents. A handshake followed, and then, barely visible on a radio unit at one man's belt, a logo, Apex Solutions. The name struck him like a blow. His fists closed tight on the console's edge. He had served on missions guided by Apex Intel. He remembered the times things had gone wrong. Patrol routes compromised, ambushes waiting, insurgents always one step ahead. He had blamed himself, blamed his hesitation, blamed his weakness for Marcus's death. But here on this flickering screen was the truth. It had never been chance. It had been betrayal. Behind him, Raven snorted sharply, pawing the floor once. The sound echoed like a judgment. Ethan swallowed and opened the next file. Audio this time. The voice that poured from the speakers was unmistakable. Marcus. Reports don't match. Every time we move on Apex Intelligence, we walk into an ambush. Every damn time. This isn't coincidence. His voice was taut, stripped of humor, laced with the tension of a man who had begun to see too much. Money's moving, big money. Transfers to ghost accounts in Zurich, the Caymans. Someone's paying for our blood. And I think it's them, Apex. Selling information, selling us. Ethan's hands shook, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the desk. Marcus's voice rolled on, hard and certain. They're dragging this war out, Ward, bleeding us so they can cash the contracts. Every ambush, every coffin draped in a flag. It's profit. That's the truth. The recording clicked off. Silence filled the chamber, but Ethan's ears rang with rage. 7 years he had cursed himself for failing Marcus. 7 years believing his brother had died because Ethan hadn't been good enough. And here, at last, was the truth. Marcus had been murdered by betrayal, not bullets. Ethan's vision blurred with fury. His breath came sharp, his chest heaving as though he had run a mile uphill. The guilt inside him twisted into something else, hot, focused, lethal. One more file. He clicked. The screen came alive with a face he knew better than his own reflection. Marcus sat hunched in the very chair Ethan now occupied, the same bunker walls behind him. He looked thinner, older, as if the war had carved years from him. But his eyes burned with the same fire they always had. "Ethan," Marcus said, his voice low but steady, "if you're watching this, I didn't make it." Ethan leaned forward, breath caught in his throat. "I left Raven for you. He'll find you. Don't ask how. Just trust me. He remembers." Marcus smiled faintly, a shadow of his usual grin. "This place. I rebuilt it, stocked it. It's the only safe house I trust. I knew one day the truth would need to come out." His shoulders slumped, his breath rasping, but his eyes only grew harder. "Apex isn't just betraying us, they're betraying the country. I've gathered what I could. Maybe it's enough, maybe not. If I can't finish this, then it's on you. The mission's yours now, brother. Finish it." He paused, coughed, winced with pain, then his face softened. "I know what you've been carrying, Ethan. You think you failed me, but you never did. You were always the shield. You kept me standing more times than I can count. So hear me now. You didn't fail. You never did. But now you have to do what you've always done best. Protect, not just me. Protect the truth. Protect the men we lost. Protect the country we bled for." He drew a shaky breath and gave a final, tired smile. "I believe in you. Always have. Always will." The screen went black. Ethan sat frozen, his hands trembled on the desk, his eyes fixed on the dark monitor. His heart thundered in his chest so loud he could hear nothing else. 7 years of guilt crumbled in an instant, replaced not with peace, but with a fire that threatened to consume him. The truth was not relief. It was anger. It was duty. It was clarity. A soft nudge pressed against his shoulder. Ethan turned. Raven stood close, his great head bowed, his amber eyes steady as ever. The Mustang exhaled a plume of steam that curled in the cold air of the chamber. Ethan swallowed hard. His voice was a whisper, cracked but certain. "Marcus, you're still leading me. But now it's my turn." For the first time in 7 years, he did not want to die. He wanted to fight. For a long while after the screen went dark, Ethan didn't move. The glow of the monitors still lingered on his face, painting his skin pale and hollow. The bunker hummed faintly around him, the weight of machinery and silence pressing down like stone. His pulse was loud in his ears, his chest rising and falling too quickly, as though he had run without moving. Marcus's voice still echoed in the room, in his blood, in his bones. At last, Ethan pushed back from the console. His legs felt stiff, unsteady, as though the floor tilted beneath him. He wandered through the chamber until he found a small door, half hidden in shadow. It creaked open to reveal a cramped bathroom. A mirror, a cracked sink, rusted fixtures, the air stale. He flicked on a dim bulb overhead. For the first time in years, he faced himself. The mirror was fogged with dust, but his reflection was still clear enough to wound. A gaunt face stared back at him, skin pale and weathered, beard thick and wild, hair matted into tangles. His eyes, those tired storm-grey eyes, looked like hollow sockets. A man unrecognizable. Not a soldier, not even a survivor. Just a ghost clinging to the shape of flesh. His hand lifted and pressed against the glass, palm trembling as it touched his own reflection. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. His voice cracked with the weight of 7 years. The silence that answered him was almost unbearable. He opened the cabinet above the sink. Inside, buried beneath old bandages and a half-empty bottle of antiseptic, lay a razor. Its handle was dulled, its blade nicked, but it was sharp enough. Ethan filled the sink with water, cold and metallic, and lowered the blade to his face. The first stroke carved a clean line through the wild beard, exposing skin he hadn't seen in years. He studied it in the mirror, a jawline that was harder than he remembered, weathered but strong. He continued stroke by stroke until the ghost disappeared, replaced by the face of a man who had once commanded respect. When the beard was gone, he took a pair of scissors from the medkit and began to cut his hair. Tufts fell into the sink, into the water. The work was uneven, but it revealed the contours of a soldier's face again. His cheekbones sharpened, his brow steadied. His eyes, though still haunted, seemed clearer, more focused. By the time he leaned back from the mirror, his chest rose with something new. Not pride exactly, but recognition. Behind him, a sound. He turned to see Raven standing in the doorway. The Mustang's head was tilted slightly, amber eyes fixed on him, ears flicked forward. The horse gave a quiet, low nicker, almost approving. Ethan exhaled. "Yeah," he muttered. "It's me again." He left the bathroom and walked back into the chamber. The weapon racks waited. He crossed to them slowly, hand trailing across polished steel, the scent of gun oil filling his nose. He hadn't touched weapons in years, not since he'd sworn them off, believing they had cost Marcus his life. Now, one by one, he lifted them down. First, the plate carrier, black, compact, heavy with the weight of ceramic plates. He slid his arms through, buckled the straps, adjusted the fit. The weight pressed against his chest and shoulders, familiar and foreign all at once. It was more than armor. It was ritual. It was the act of putting back on the skin he had shed 7 years ago. Next, gloves. Tactical leather, snug across his palms, his fingers flexed into them like they belonged there. Then boots, old but well kept, soles thick, laces tight. He stamped his heel against the floor and felt the solid comfort of readiness return. His breath steadied, his eyes sharpened. The man in the mirror was gone, the ranger was back. "You're not in hiding anymore," he told himself. "You're here to fight." He turned to the weapons. The BCM rifle was the first. He checked the chamber, ran a cleaning cloth down the barrel, clipped on a Trigicon scope. Each movement came as naturally as if no time had passed. The click of the magazine locking in, the metallic snap of the charging handle. All of it fed something inside him, something starving. Then the Sig Sauer P226, his old sidearm. He broke it down in seconds. Slide, barrel, spring, frame. His hands worked with a smoothness that surprised him, muscle memory reawakening. He oiled, reassembled, loaded. The weight of it fit his grip like a handshake from an old friend. Finally, the night vision goggles. He snapped in fresh batteries, lifted them over his head, and lowered the lenses. A faint green light filled his vision, turning the chamber into a glowing ghost world. He smiled grimly, heartbeat steady. He lifted the rifle, aimed into the empty chamber, and dry-fired. The click echoed like a drumbeat. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with readiness. Behind him, Raven stomped once, his hooves ringing loud on the steel floor. The horse's ears flicked forward, his body tense as if recognizing the moment. He wasn't just watching, he was bearing witness. Ethan lowered the rifle slowly, exhaling through his teeth. Then his gaze fell back on the console. The folder labeled Legacy still glowed faintly on the screen, but now another file caught his eye, marked differently. Simple, one word: Valhalla. Ethan clicked, the screen blinked. A prompt appeared. Decryption key required. Access only via secure military server. Below it a note. Marcus's note. This is the fire starter. Handle with care. Ethan leaned back in the chair, his jaw tightening. Marcus had left him everything. The bunker, the evidence, the horse, and now this. A file named for the warrior's afterlife. But to unlock it, he'd have to request the key. And requesting meant exposure. The signal would light up on every network Apex controlled. The second he sent that ping, they would know someone had the data. They would know it was him. He sat in silence, staring at the cursor blinking on the screen. Safety lay in silence. He could stay hidden here, live out his days in the bunker with Marcus's ghost and the Mustang for company. The world would go on turning, and Apex would go on killing. Or he could risk it all, send the request, call down fire on himself. But in doing so, he would learn the truth and maybe, just maybe, finish what Marcus had started. His hands hovered over the keyboard. His chest rose and fell. Then Raven moved. The Mustang stepped closer, heavy hooves clanging on steel, and lowered his great head until his mane brushed Ethan's shoulder. The touch was warm, steady. The weight of it was not pressure, but urging. Ethan closed his eyes. He could almost hear Marcus's voice again. Trust him, Ward. Trust the horse. Trust yourself. He opened his eyes and whispered, All right, Marcus. If the whole damn world hears me coming, so be it. His fingers flew across the keys. Command entered. Request sent. The screen flashed. Request transmitted. Awaiting response. Ethan leaned back, exhaling. His heart pounded with a force that felt like battle. He knew what would come next. Apex would see. They would move. They would come for him. But for the first time in 7 years, Ethan Ward wasn't afraid. He was ready. The storm outside Oregon's Blue Mountains howled like a beast. But hundreds of miles away, in a glass tower in Reston, Virginia, the air was silent, sterile, and cold. The headquarters of Apex Solutions loomed like a monument to ambition, 40 stories of mirrored glass reflecting the city lights, every surface gleaming with calculated power. The top floor, the nerve center, was a place where wars were managed not with rifles and blood, but with contracts, satellites, and shadows. Inside, the Situation Room glowed with screens. Analysts hunched over keyboards, green and red lights blinking like the pulse of a hidden empire. Then a piercing alarm shattered the hush. On the central wall of monitors, a crimson banner flashed. Cerberus flag activated. Key request detected. Conversation stopped. Fingers froze above keyboards. Every face turned pale. The glass door slid open and a man entered. At 48, he was carved from iron and ice. His suit was immaculate charcoal wool, black silk tie knotted with military precision. His hair, streaked silver and black, was combed with surgical neatness. But it was his eyes, cold steel gray, that froze the room. They were the eyes of a man who had once commanded soldiers and now commanded something far more dangerous. Loyalty bought with money and fear. What is it? His voice was low even, but it cut through the room like a blade. One of the analysts swallowed hard. Sir, Cerberus just triggered. A request was made to the Department of Defense archival server, specifically for a decryption key tied to Service File 731 Vance. The name hit the air like a shot. The room tightened. Source? The man asked. We can't lock it completely. Whoever did it used multiple encrypted relays, bounced the signal across 5 continents. But the probable origin point? The analyst hesitated, eyes flicking to the map. Blue Mountains, Oregon. For the first time in years, the man's mask shifted. Just a flicker. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened. So, he murmured, he's still alive. The weight of the statement settled over the room like frost. No one dared breathe. The man moved to the head of the operations table. A digital map of Oregon bloomed across the screen, the Blue Mountains rendered in spectral blue and white. His gloved finger tapped the ridges. Deploy Task Force Omega. The words were calm, final. A murmur rippled through the aides. Even for Apex, Task Force Omega was not lightly summoned. They were the hammer reserved for breaking enemies too stubborn or too dangerous to be erased by money and politics. One junior officer dared to speak. Sir, are we certain? Task Force Omega is high profile. The man turned, just turned. The young man shrank back. Retrieve everything, he said coldly. Every file, every drive, every trace. And listen carefully. His gaze swept the room. No survivors, not one. Do you understand? No one answered. No one needed to. He stood before the glowing map, his reflection warped in the glass. His expression was unreadable, but inside him burned something darker than professional resolve. This was Elias Ward, and the ghost in the mountains was his brother, Ethan Ward, the bastard son, the other heir, the soldier who had worn honor like a second skin while Elias had stripped his away, piece by piece, to climb higher. Ethan, who carried the one thing Elias had never possessed, the loyalty of men like Marcus Hale. Hatred simmered beneath his polished exterior. Hatred and fear. Because Ethan was not just a threat to Apex, he was a threat to Elias himself. Elias leaned closer to the map. You've been hiding in the snow for too long, little brother. Now you're mine. Across the country, under the scream of storm winds, a helicopter cut low through the night. Its blades chopped the snow into spirals as it descended toward a frozen clearing at the edge of the Blue Mountains. 8 shadows jumped from its bay. Task Force Omega. They were former soldiers from half a dozen nations, each one hand-picked for ruthlessness and skill. Faces hidden behind balaclavas, eyes shielded by night optics, movements fluid as wolves. Their carbines gleamed matte black, suppressors fitted, optics glowing faint red. The squad leader raised 2 fingers. The men fanned out, spreading into a wedge. No words passed between them, only sharp hand signals. They moved with the economy of predators, snow crunching beneath their boots in perfect rhythm. From a ridge half a mile away, Raven lifted his head. The Mustang's ears twitched, catching vibrations no human ear could. His nostrils flared, sensing the shift in the wind. The scent of metal and oil carried on the storm. A low, rumbling nicker escaped him. He stamped once, hard, snow scattering beneath his hooves. Deep in the bunker, Ethan looked up as the sound echoed faintly through the steel walls. Raven had warned him. He hurried to the console. The map blinked to life, sensors pinging. A red dot appeared in the sky, an enemy drone sweeping the area with synthetic eyes. Not tonight, Ethan muttered. He reached across the controls and flipped a switch. The jammer roared silently to life. On the screen, the red dot flickered, scrambled. Its feed dissolved into static, then died. A moment later, another panel lit up with fractured signals, the Omega team's ground radar. One by one, those signals collapsed into nothing. An AI voice, soft and female, whispered through the chamber, "Perimeter secure, enemy surveillance disabled." Ethan exhaled slowly. He could feel the storm tightening around him, not just outside, but in here, in the steel ribs of the mountain. He crossed the room, lifted the BCM rifle from its rack, and slung it across his chest. He checked the sidearm, the spare mags, the night vision goggles clipped to his helmet. Then he turned to Raven. The Mustang stood steady, eyes bright in the dim bunker light. His muscles rippled under his dark coat, mane tossing with the faint stir of recycled air. He pawed the steel floor, ears pricked forward. "They're here," Ethan whispered, his voice low and even. "It's our turn now, Marcus. Time to pay what's owed." He rested his hand against Raven's neck. The horse snorted, breath steaming in the cold of the corridor. Then Raven threw back his head and screamed, a high ringing whinny that echoed through the bunker like a trumpet before battle. Ethan's eyes hardened, blue-gray steel in the glow of the monitors. The war had come. The bunker hummed around him, the steel bones of the mountain vibrating with distant echoes. Ethan knew the fortress wouldn't hold forever. The Omega team outside were professionals. Given enough time and explosives, they'd breach the front gate. He had no intention of waiting for that moment. He crossed to the rear corridor, boots striking hard against the grated floor, Raven's hooves clanging close behind. At the end of the passage, a narrow hatch waited, its painted bolts rusted but still functional. Ethan spun the wheel and heaved the door open. A rush of icy air greeted him, carrying the tang of wet stone. Beyond lay the emergency spillway, a water tunnel carved decades ago by army engineers, meant as an escape route if the bunker was ever compromised. Cold water ran shallow over jagged rocks, the ceiling low, the air thick with mineral damp. Ethan ducked inside. Raven followed without hesitation, hooves striking sparks off the stone as they clattered through the tunnel. Their breath filled the narrow space, white clouds mixing with the mist. The deeper they moved, the more the storm outside faded, replaced by the echo of rushing water and the steady rhythm of their steps. Minutes later, they emerged from a jagged cleft in the mountainside. Snow poured down in veils, hiding them instantly. Behind them, the hidden steel hatch blended into shadow, invisible under the storm. They were ghosts now, moving through a world of white. On the ridgeline below, the Omega team had set up their equipment. A portable generator roared against the storm, cables snaked into terminals, powering ground radar, comms relays, thermal scanners. The soldiers worked quickly, faces unreadable beneath their masks, rifles slung but ready. Ethan crept along the tree line, breath slow, rifle steady against his chest. Snow muffled his steps, his body moving as if pulled back through time to Afghanistan, Iraq, unnamed valleys and unnamed wars. He became what Marcus had trained him to be, silent, invisible, inevitable. He lined up the shot. The generator throbbed with life, spilling heat and light into the snow. Ethan exhaled, finger tightening on the trigger. Pop, pop, pop. The rifle cracked, muzzle flash swallowed by the storm, rounds punched into the generator's casing. Sparks showered, then fire. The engine shrieked and died. The clearing plunged into darkness. Shouts erupted in the Omega team's radios. Power's down. I lost radar. Everything's offline. Screens blinked dead. Thermal scopes froze. Comms relays went dark. The team, trained to rely on their technology, were suddenly blind. Ethan melted back into the forest before they could trace the origin of the shots. His lips curled into the faintest grim smile. "Welcome to my battlefield," he whispered. The next move was Marcus's move, the one Ethan had learned years ago in whispered lessons over campfires. Control the ground. Control their fear. He worked fast, crouched low beneath the pines, fingers stiff with cold but precise. Charges, old seismic mines Marcus had stockpiled, were buried beneath snowdrifts, their wires hidden under branches. He linked them with trip lines, blending them into the storm's chaos. Each step, each pull of wire, was a memory of survival carved into his body. Minutes later, the trap was set. Through the scope, Ethan watched the Omega squad move into the tree line, weapons sweeping, formation tight. Their eyes darted, their breaths fast, every sense straining. He waited. The first man stepped across the wire. Ethan squeezed the detonator. Boom! The earth shook. Snow avalanched from the trees. Branches cracked. The man was flung backward, rifle spiraling from his hands. The rest staggered as the forest itself seemed to explode around them. Ethan triggered another charge. Another thunderclap rolled through the mountains. White plumes burst from the ground. The squad stumbled, scattered, shouting in panic. "It's a minefield," one yelled, voice tinny over the comms. The panic spread like fire. To them it wasn't two detonations, it was dozens. A forest wired for death. Ethan moved with the storm circling them, his shadow vanishing and reappearing. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. He squeezed off controlled bursts. 3 shots here, 4 there, then relocated, his muzzle flash a phantom in the snow. "Multiple contacts, we're surrounded," another voice screamed. They weren't surrounded, there was only him. But fear is louder than truth. The squad split, cohesion unraveling. Men darted into the trees alone, rifles jerking at shadows. Their wolfpack precision crumbled, replaced by the chaos of prey. Ethan fired again, then again, each time from a new angle. His echoes ricocheted through the storm, impossible to pin down. To the Omega soldiers, it was as if the mountains themselves were shooting at them. And then the mountain gave them something worse. Raven, the Mustang, emerged from the white mane whipping in the gale, eyes glowing amber. He galloped through the chaos like a vision conjured from myth, hooves pounding deep into the snow. His scream pierced the blizzard, wild and terrible. For a split second, every soldier froze. "What the hell is that?" one shouted. The horse vanished into the storm, only to reappear yards away, a phantom blur. Snow flew under his hooves, his body gleaming black against the white. To soldiers raised on superstition and fatigue, it was no animal. It was a ghost, a war spirit. Terror broke their ranks. One man dropped his rifle, stumbling backward, eyes wide. Another cursed, spinning wildly, firing blind into the dark. Ethan used the moment. Another burst of fire, another scream in the storm. The Omega squad was finished. What discipline they had was shredded. They fell back in disarray, radios sputtering orders drowned out by panic. Ethan crouched in the shadows, watching through his optics, his breath steaming steady. One by one, the red-lensed eyes of Omega soldiers disappeared into the storm, fleeing the unseen hunters. But not all of them. Through the blur of snow, 3 figures remained: Elias Ward and 2 of his best. The rest of the squad was gone, scattered and broken, but Elias stood in the clearing, rifle steady, shoulders square. His 2 lieutenants flanked him, disciplined even as the storm swallowed their comrades. Ethan lowered the scope, his jaw tight. This wasn't over. He pulled a map from his pocket, eyes flicking to a mark scratched years ago by Marcus. Black Canyon, the place for an ending. He shouldered his rifle, checked his gear, then whistled low. Raven appeared out of the storm, snow dusting his coat. The horse tossed his head, eyes burning with the same fire as Ethan's. Black Canyon, Ethan said quietly, his voice steady. That's where this ends. Raven screamed, the sound ripping across the ridgeline, carrying into the night like a challenge. Ethan set off into the storm, leaving faint tracks that led deliberately toward the dark gorge. Tracks meant to be followed. The trap was set. Black Canyon was a wound in the earth, narrow, steep, and black as gunmetal. The walls rose on either side like twin knives, their faces polished by ages of wind. There was only one way in and one way out. The gorge funneled everything, snow, sound, breath, into a single hard edge. Wind knifed through the slit of sky overhead, whipping the falling snow into spirals that spun and vanished. The storm's roar narrowed here, turned sharp and hungry. Ethan arrived first. He moved along the western wall, keeping to the rock's shadow, reading the canyon as if it were a map he'd carried all his life. The ground was treacherous, slick crust over jagged stone. But the terrain was exactly what he needed. Here, numbers didn't matter. Angles and timing did. A single fighter could hold a corridor like this, turn it into a lever, a fulcrum. Raven appeared beside him a moment later, materializing out of the white. The Mustang's breath plumed in the air, his mane snapped like a flag in the wind. He stamped once, then stilled, ears forward, watching the canyon mouth. "Good," Ethan murmured, gloved hand brushing the horse's neck. "Wait here." He swarmed up a broken seam in the basalt, boots and fingers finding holds in the scantest ridges, and belly crawled onto a narrow ledge 20 feet above the canyon floor. From here, he had a clean view of the approach, a dark slit framed by blowing snow. He settled the BCM rifle across the rock, scope steady, cheek welded to the stock. The wind shoved at him. He leaned into it, exhaled, let his pulse slow. They came as predicted. 3 figures, black silhouettes against the white, cutting straight down the throat of the canyon. Elias Ward in the center, 2 of his best men on his flanks. The rest of Omega had scattered, undone by fear and the storm, but these 3 moved like blades. Elias halted, scanning the walls, head tipped back, night optics gleaming. "He won't slip us," he said, voice carrying in the narrow space. "He's out of ground. It ends here." The lieutenants nodded, rifles poised, boots biting into icy stone. Ethan let the scope settle on Elias's chest, then slid it down to the rifle in his hands. Wind tugged at his hood, bit his ear. He waited for that breathless hush between gusts, the fractional silence a shooter learns to love. Then he squeezed. The report snapped off the canyon walls like a whip crack. Elias's rifle jolted, then exploded from his grip in a burst of splintered metal. The weapon clattered across the rock and skittered into the snow. Elias flinched, stunned, then lifted his head. For the first time, Ethan saw his brother's eyes without glass between them. Cold, furious, calculating. Ethan rose, flowed down the face of the rock, and dropped to the floor with the casual precision of a man landing on familiar ground. He lifted his rifle to low ready. "Enough running," he said. "Look at me." Elias took him in, plate carrier, rifle, the set of his shoulders, and gave a small, crooked smile that had no warmth. "There you are," he said softly. Ghost turned man again. Snow hissed around them, wind slicing through the canyon. Raven stepped from the shadow behind Ethan and stood tall, ears pinned forward, eyes burning. The lieutenants twitched at the sight of the black Mustang, a phantom from the storm, then steadied their barrels, tracking minute arcs. "Drop the act," Ethan said. "This isn't about me and you, it's about Marcus." His voice hardened. "You sold him out. How many died to feed your contracts?" Elias didn't flinch. "I do what survival requires." He tilted his head, studying Ethan as if he were a specimen. "You chose to rot in a cabin. You chose death. I chose power. Tell me, which of us understood the world?" "Survival isn't betrayal," Ethan shot back. "What you do is the opposite of living. It's burying yourself in a different grave and calling it a penthouse." Elias's mouth twitched, a smile without joy. "Marcus believed in you," he said, voice silk and acid. "And you let him die. You think today will be different. You think a horse and a rifle wash blood from your hands." Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle. The memories were not knives anymore. They were fuel. "Different because I'm awake," he said quietly. "And because I'm not letting you or Apex burn anyone else." Elias's eyes flicked to his men, then back. A choice flashed through his gaze. He snarled, a sound too primal for the suit he usually wore, and lunged. The lieutenants moved with him, rifles rising, boots hammering the stone. Raven exploded from the side fissure like a projectile. One instant he was statue still, the next a black blur of muscle and fury. He struck Elias square in the chest with both forehooves. The impact sounded like a sledgehammer hitting armor. Elias flew backward and slammed onto the rock, breath torn from his lungs, a spray of snow leaping around him. His sidearm skittered into a drift, lost. The lieutenants froze for just a heartbeat, staring at the myth-made flesh. In the canyon's white roar, the stallion looked like he'd been sculpted from storm and midnight. Ethan moved through that frozen beat. He surged forward, closing the distance before the nearest lieutenant's eyes could refocus. Parry, trap, elbow to jaw, clean, brutal economy. The man dropped, rifle clattering. Ethan pivoted, moving inside the second man's guard before the muzzle rose. A short, bone-driven strike to wrist and throat, a sweep that dumped the soldier into the snow, and a knee that made staying down the best option. Raven planted himself between Ethan and Elias, head lowered, ears flat, eyes like coins of fire. Elias rolled to his side, gasping, one hand clawing at rock, the other pressed to his chest, where the bruising would flower later. He looked up, past the steam curling from Raven's nostrils, to Ethan's face. Fury warred with something else there, something hollow, almost human. Boots crunched at the canyon mouth, figures gathered in the whirling white. The remainder of Omega, shaken and disordered, spilled into the gorge and came up short at the tableau. Their commander on his back, two of their own disarmed, the black horse standing sentinel beside the man they'd hunted. One by one, the rifles dipped. Gloved hands rose. The surrender came like a shiver moving through a body, inevitable. Silence fell, sudden and complete. Snow ticked against rock. Somewhere high above, ice cracked like distant thunder. Ethan didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just stood there, breathing hard, with Raven's heat at his side and his own heartbeat steadier than it had been in years. The fight was over. The war? Not yet. He bound the lieutenants with their own zip ties and stepped back. "On your feet," he told Elias. "You're going to answer for all of it." Elias didn't answer. He stared up at the white slit of sky, jaw locked, and said nothing at all. The bunker welcomed him back with the low, familiar hum of machines and the steady breath of recycled air. Ethan walked in silence to the console, shedding snow from his shoulders, Raven's hoofbeats ringing slow and even on the steel floor behind him. The monitors still glowed with the last commands he'd entered, his skirmish with Apex frozen in lines of code and sensor logs. A new icon pulsed in the corner of the screen. Protocol Valhalla had been unlocked. Ethan sat. His fingers hovered above the keys for a heartbeat. Then he opened the file. A passphrase prompt blinked. He tried the word that had unlocked every hard door in his life. Marcus. The screen flickered and simple text appeared. For Ethan. From Marcus. He felt the breath leave his chest in a long, quiet rush. Then the file opened. Inside was a clean list, no flourishes, no drama. An encrypted contact for Sarah Cole, a journalist whose name Ethan knew in the way soldiers knew the names of certain medics and chaplains, the ones who went where others didn't. Marcus's note followed in plain language. If I fall, she's the one who won't sell it, bury it, or water it down. She'll set it on fire where everyone can see. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, his hands were steady. He pulled the data drive, slotted a blank chip, and began to copy. The bunker's servers spilled their guts onto silicon. The grainy video of Americans passing a case to insurgents in a sun-scarred ravine. The audio of Marcus counting dollars into ghost accounts overseas. Mission logs with timelines that matched ambushes like fingerprints. Internal memos that smelled like rot. When it finished, he sealed the chip in a waterproof capsule, taped a printed map inside with precise coordinates. Pine marker, creek bend, rock shelf, then stood. He opened a satellite link one last time, the uplink icon winking a quiet green. The secure channel sprang to life. Ethan typed, I have irrefutable evidence of treason by Apex Solutions, illegal intelligence sales, and targeted killings of US personnel. Attached is the full dataset and a dead drop coordinate. Do what you do best. He signed it with nothing at all. Then he sent it. A bar crept across the screen, increment by increment, breath by breath, until it went solid. Delivered. He cut the connection clean, scissoring the bunker's digital vein forever. No more pings, no more trails. Just silence and the storm above. He stashed the capsule where he'd marked it, miles from the bunker, across terrain only a Mustang and a Ranger would love. A hollow under a root, a rock that looked like nothing. Snow drifted in and erased their tracks as they left. Then they waited. Days have a different weight when the world is hunting you and you're hunting back. Ethan rationed in the bunker's heat and light, slept in 2-hour slices, checked his perimeters in slow, silent circuits. Raven dozed, standing, head low, then jerked awake at faint sounds from the mountain's skin. Murmur of wind, scratch of ice, the things only a creature born outside could pass. On the third day, the storm broke. Sunlight slid across the ridge in a clean blade, and the world above the mountain caught fire. The first alert came from a local station, an exclusive from Sarah Cole, with a headline that wasn't a headline at all, so much as a detonation. Apex Solutions, treason for profit. Screens multiplied it in seconds. The video from the ravine played on a loop. The audio logs ran with transcripts, names redacted in the first hour, then restored in the second. Bank records unfurled like a map of guilt. Other outlets piled on. Blood for contracts, the war behind the war. How a private empire sold out its own. Marcus Hale's name rose from the ash of 7 years and became a banner. Photos of him laughing in dusty BDUs, squinting into the sun, arm around men who were now names etched in stone, filled the corners of screens. The word hero returned to him openly, not whispered in bars or carved in private grief. Ethan watched from the dim of the bunker, the glow of the console painting his face. His eyes burned, not with rage this time, but with something that felt like relief and hurt, tangled together. You've got your name back, he said quietly. You've got your truth. The arrests began before sunset. On national feeds, FBI jackets filled the lobby of the Apex Tower in Reston. Men in suits who'd once smiled next to senators were walked out with their hands cuffed and their faces drained. Among them, Elias Ward. His suit was immaculate, his hair perfect, but his eyes were empty now, the calculation inside them spent. Cameras swarmed as he was loaded into a black SUV. The chyron at the bottom of the screen stacked the charges in a grim catalogue. Treason, conspiracy, accessory to murder. The footage cut to Oregon next. Agents escorting the surviving Omega operators, lips blue from cold, faces grey with a week's worth of defeat, down a mountain road behind snowcats. They did not look at the cameras. Ethan watched it all and let the breath he'd been holding for 7 years finally slip out. The hurt didn't vanish. It probably never would. But it no longer had nowhere to go. When the world's noise settled into a steady roar, he stood and walked to the control alcove where Marcus had left one last mercy. A brushed metal panel, a covered switch, scuttle protocol. He lifted the cover, the switch waited beneath, practical and unimpressed. Time, he told Raven, we put it to rest. He flipped it. Alarms did not scream, lights did not strobe. The bunker accepted its fate with the quiet professionalism of a soldier making a bed for the last time. The AI's voice, calm, almost human, spoke once. System collapse in 60 minutes. Rows of LEDs winked out in sequence. Servers spun down, their hum lowering into a whisper, then nothing. Ventilation slowed to a long sigh. The geothermal core yielded its heat to the rock that cradled it. Hidden plates retracted, supports unlocked. Somewhere deep in the bedrock, carefully hoarded charges loosened the cliff's face just enough to let gravity finish the job. Ethan stood with Raven and watched memory go dark. The armory, the cots, the console where Marcus's face had glowed one last time. He ran his fingers across the chair back, feeling the groove carved there by hours and worry and the weight of a conscience. Work's done, he said softly into the emptiness. Rest easy. They took what they needed, a pack with water, a few MREs, the rifle slung safe and quiet, a coil of rope, a blanket that smelled faintly of machine oil and pine. Then they walked the corridor toward the great door one last time. It opened for them the way it had opened that first day, stone yielding to steel, steel to snow and light. The mountain air kissed their faces, crisp and clean. They stepped into morning. Behind them, deep within the rock, a muffled series of pops echoed. Not the violence of demolition, but the final courteous gestures of a structure sealing itself away. The door slid closed, the seams cinched tight, and then the rock face shrugged. A curtain of stones came down in a muted roar. When the dust settled, the cliff was unbroken. The Cascade Relay Station was gone from the world of the living, its duty done. Before them, the blue mountains stretched like a cathedral under a sky newly washed. Sunlight spilled across the high ridges, turning the snowfields to hammered silver. The wind had dropped to a polite murmur, moving through fir boughs with a sound like breath. Ethan tightened his pack, set his boot in the stir of crusted snow, and swung onto Raven's back. The Mustang lifted his head and let out a ringing, triumphant whinny that bounced from ridge to ridge and came back brighter. His muscles coiled beneath Ethan like stored lightning. They stood there for a moment, the man and the horse, silhouettes cut from the same clean line at the edge of a world that suddenly belonged to them again. Ethan leaned forward, laid a hand along Raven's warm neck, and whispered into the bright, cold air, "We're free, boy. Let's ride." Raven jumped forward as if the words were spurs. Snow flew in silver fans from his hooves. The rhythm of his gait settled into that powerful ground-eating lope that said distance was nothing but a suggestion. They arrowed down a narrow trail stitched along the ridge, the world rushing past in white and green and light. Somewhere far behind them, in rooms full of screens and headlines and shocked faces, a story was ending. Out here, a different one was starting. They rode into it side by side, man remade, horse unbroken, following a trail only the living could see. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.